She sat across from him in a room full of people who would never know her secret, and he smiled at her like she was the first good thing that had happened to him in years. He had no idea that she already knew his name, that she had read the file, that on the worst night of his life, when his wife's heart stopped beating in a hospital corridor 40 miles away, Vivian Ashcroft had been in a boardroom signing the paperwork that funded the program meant to save her. Some connections aren't fate. Some are just damage that hasn't introduced itself yet. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The suit didn't fit right. Grayson Hale stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:47 on a Friday evening, tugging at the collar of a jacket he hadn't worn since his wife's funeral, and tried to remember why he'd agreed to any of this. The answer, of course, was Marcus. Marcus Webb had been Grayson's closest friend for 11 years. Through college, through bad jobs and worse apartments, through the wedding and the baby and the grief that came after. He was also, Grayson had recently concluded, a man with absolutely no sense of appropriate timing or personal boundaries. "It's not a date," Marcus had said 3 weeks ago, over lunch at the diner 2 blocks from Grayson's apartment. "It's a charity gala. You sit at a table, you eat food that costs more than your rent, you maybe talk to some people. Very low stakes." "Then why do you keep saying, and there might be someone there you'd enjoy meeting?" Marcus had looked away. Specifically, he had looked at his coffee cup with the intensity of a man who had never in his life done anything wrong. "Marcus, it's not a setup. It's a coincidence. A planned coincidence. Those are called opportunities." Grayson had said no 3 times, clearly, in complete sentences. And then his mother-in-law had called, Donna, who he still saw every Sunday for Ellie's sake, who still left food at his door during bad weeks. And she had said very quietly, "Grayson, honey, I think you should go." And something about the way she said it made him feel like arguing would be a small cruelty he couldn't afford. So here he was, jacket that didn't fit, tie he'd had to watch a YouTube tutorial to knot, 8-year-old daughter sitting on the closed toilet lid behind him, watching with the focused expression she used when she was deciding whether or not something was worth commenting on. "You look weird," Ellie said. "Thank you. Not bad weird, just—" She tilted her head. "Like you're wearing a costume." He turned around and looked at her. She was in her pajamas already, the ones with the little foxes on them, hair in the messy braid she'd started insisting on doing herself. She looked so much like her mother sometimes that it still caught him off guard, not in a painful way anymore, more like a reminder of something he was supposed to keep safe. "I kind of am," he said. "Is it like a spy mission?" "Something like that." She seemed to accept this. "Will you be back before I wake up?" "Before midnight, definitely." "Mrs. Patterson said we could watch a movie until 9. "That sounds like something Mrs. Patterson is allowed to decide." Ellie slid off the toilet and came to stand beside him, looking at both of their reflections in the mirror. She reached up and straightened his tie with the seriousness of someone who had no idea how to straighten a tie. It made it worse. He didn't fix it. "You should probably comb your hair," she said. "Probably." She patted his arm once, this small maternal gesture that she'd somehow developed entirely on her own, and then wandered out toward the living room. He heard the TV click on, heard Mrs. Patterson's voice, the retired schoolteacher from down the hall who watched Ellie on the rare occasions he had somewhere to be. He looked at himself in the mirror for another few seconds. 32 years old. Dark circles he'd stopped trying to conceal. A jaw that needed a better shave than he'd given it. The jacket really did fit wrong. It was a little too big across the shoulders now because he'd been thinner 2 years ago. Thinner in the particular way that grief made you thin in the first months when eating felt like a task requiring more motivation than you had. He looked like a man attending a function he didn't want to attend, which was accurate. He grabbed his keys. The Harlow Grand wasn't the kind of place Grayson usually went. It was the kind of place he usually drove past and didn't think about. The way you don't think about things that exist in an entirely different category of life than your own. The facade was all dark stone and amber light, the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they'd just returned from a long weekend in the south of France. A valet line stretched to the corner. Women in dresses that cost more than his car stepped out of black sedans. He parked 3 blocks away and walked. Marcus met him at the entrance, which Grayson now understood meant Marcus had been watching the door. "You came," Marcus said. "I told you I was coming." "Yeah, but I said I was coming, Marcus. I came." He looked past his friend at the crowd already thickening inside the lobby. Crystal and candlelight and the particular sound of expensive events, conversation pitched slightly higher than normal, laughter time just a half beat too well. "This is a lot of people." "It's a gala. That's kind of the definition." "I don't do galas." "You're doing one right now. Come on." Marcus put a hand on his shoulder and steered him toward the entrance. "Drink first. I'll explain the seating." "Why does the seating need explaining?" "It just does." A pause. "Don't be weird about it." Grayson stopped walking. "Marcus, it's really not. If this is a setup, it is not a setup." Marcus said this with the conviction of a man who had rehearsed it. "It is a charitable event. You are sitting at a table. There will be other people at the table. One of them might be a woman. That is not a setup. That is seating." Grayson looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to drink so much of their free wine," Grayson said. "That's the spirit." What? The ballroom was the kind of room designed to make you feel like you'd accidentally wandered into someone else's life. High ceilings with chandeliers that were probably worth more than the building Grayson lived in. Circular tables set with white linen and centerpieces that were all orchids and dark greenery. At the front, a small stage was already occupied by a string quartet working through something that sounded vaguely like a Coldplay song stripped of everything that made it recognizable. He accepted a glass of wine from a passing server. It tasted like something that had never been near a grocery store shelf. "Table 7, Marcus said, checking his phone. "Over there. I'll come find you in a bit. I need to find Claire. She's already texting me that she lost my jacket." "You brought Claire?" "She's my girlfriend." "You've been dating for 3 months." 3.5. Marcus was already backing away. "Table 7. Have a conversation. You know how those work?" He disappeared into the crowd. Grayson stood there for a moment with his wine. Someone bumped his elbow, a man in a very expensive watch who apologized without making eye contact. The string quartet shifted into something that might have been a Radiohead song. He was not sure the violin was the right instrument for Radiohead. He found table 7. There were place cards. His was between a couple he didn't recognize, the Hendersons, whoever they were, and a card that read simply V. Ashcroft. He didn't know the name. He sat down. But she arrived 12 minutes later. He knew it was her because she was the only person who came to the table alone, without the husband or colleague or the slight social anxiety of someone looking for their seat. She moved through the room like someone who had learned, probably through necessity, how to enter spaces without broadcasting that she was entering them, which was notable, because she was the kind of woman people noticed. Not in the way that the word usually gets used. It wasn't that she was beautiful, though she was, dark hair worn back with the kind of effortless precision that probably took actual effort, a dress that was deep green and simple, in the way that simple things cost a fortune. It was more that she carried something, not arrogance, something more like weight, like a person who had been handed a great deal and was still deciding how to carry it. She sat down across from him. She looked at him. She said, "You look like you'd rather be somewhere else." "I'm working on not being obvious about it," he said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Is it working?" "Apparently not." She reached for the water glass and took a sip, and for a moment they were both just sitting there, strangers at a table designed by someone else's idea of fate. The couple on his other side, the Hendersons, were deep in their own conversation. The quartet had moved into something unambiguous now, something classical that he didn't know the name of. "Vivian," she said, and extended her hand across the table. "Grayson." He shook it. Her grip was firm, direct. "Is this—" He stopped. "Is this what?" "Were you also—" He tried to figure out how to ask the question without sounding like he was accusing someone of something. "Were you told there might be other interesting people at this table?" She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted very slightly, the particular movement of someone recalibrating. "Someone may have mentioned something like that to me," she said carefully. "Marcus Webb." Her eyes moved. Elena Park. He didn't know who Elena Park was. He'd figure it out later. So, she agreed. They sat with it for a second. How angry are you? She asked. Not unkindly. On a scale of what? 1 to 10, 1 being mildly irritated, 10 being you're going to leave right now. He thought about it honestly. 3, maybe 3.5. I don't... He stopped, started again. I was pretty clearly told this was going to be a regular event. Same. She set down her water glass. I was also told, and I am quoting directly, that it would be purely coincidental if we ended up at the same table. Marcus used the word coincidental too. I think they rehearsed together. That's both impressive and concerning. Yeah. The table was filling up now, other couples arriving, the low sound of introductions being made. A woman across the table was loudly describing a recent trip to Lisbon. One of the servers appeared and began discussing the menu. It was the kind of comfortable social machinery that required nothing of you if you didn't want it to. Vivienne picked up the menu card. Well, she said, not looking up. We're here. The food is probably going to be decent. I'm Vivienne Ashcroft. I run a company, and I haven't been to one of these in about 8 months because I kept finding excuses not to. What about you? He found himself answering before he'd decided to. I'm a structural engineer. I have an 8-year-old daughter. I'm here because someone very important to me asked me to come, and I couldn't say no to her. Your daughter? My mother-in-law. A small pause. Oh, my wife died 2 years ago, he said, and then almost immediately regretted how flat and unqualified it came out, not because he was embarrassed by it, but because it was the kind of sentence that tended to rearrange people's expressions in ways that made the rest of the evening awkward. Vivienne's expression didn't rearrange. She looked at him steadily, and whatever was in her face was careful in a way that felt like, not pity, something more measured than that, something closer to recognition. I'm sorry, she said, and then, you don't have to talk about it. I know. He set his menu down. I don't usually say it that fast. I don't know why I did. Maybe because it's easier to say it early, she said quietly, than to have it come out sideways in the middle of a conversation about something else. He looked at her. I know something about that, she said, and left it there. The servers came. The first course appeared. The woman across the table had moved on from Lisbon and was now discussing a renovation. The string quartet was doing something that sounded almost, despite everything, like it might be beautiful. Grayson Hale picked up his fork and looked across the table at Vivienne Ashcroft, who was looking at her plate with an expression he couldn't read yet, and thought, okay then. The dinner went differently than he'd expected. Not dramatically differently. He hadn't expected fireworks or revelation. He was 32, not 20. He'd expected bad conversation, polite endurance, the particular social exhaustion of spending 2 hours pretending to be more present than you actually were. He'd expected to go home and message Marcus something pointed and sarcastic. What happened instead was that they talked. Not the way people talk at events like this. Not the performance of conversation, the trading of resume highlights, and interesting weekend anecdotes. They talk the way people talk when they're too tired to be strategic about it. He found out she'd grown up in Portland, Oregon. Not wealthy. Her mother had worked 2 jobs. Her father had been intermittently present and then mostly absent. She'd started her first company at 23 with money she'd saved and a business partner who dropped out 8 months in, and she'd spent the following 4 years rebuilding it alone. She currently ran Ashcroft Ventures from an office in the city, and while she gave him the polished version of what that meant, he could hear the real version underneath it, the exhaustion, the cost, the specific loneliness of building something that demanded everything from you. Do you like it? He asked. She seemed to consider whether to answer honestly. I'm very good at it, she said finally. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. It's not. He told her about Ellie, not the careful, managed version he gave people he didn't trust yet, the version where everything was fine and she was doing great and he had everything under control. He told her the real version, the way Ellie had started doing this thing after her mother died, where she'd check on him at night. She'd climb out of her bed and come stand in the doorway of his room just to make sure he was still there. He'd started leaving the lamp on low so she wouldn't see darkness under the door. He told Vivian this and immediately wondered why he had, and then didn't try to walk it back. "She sounds like she's carrying something too big for her," Vivian said. "Yeah." He picked up his wine. "She's doing better now. We both are. Better is—" He turned the glass in his hand. "Better is relative. Better means you can get through most days without it being the whole day." He looked up. "Sorry," she said. "I'm projecting." "No, you're—" He paused. "Who did you lose?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone who didn't want to answer, but the quiet of someone deciding how much of the answer to give. "My brother," she said. 3 years ago. He was 26. She looked at her wine glass. Heart problem. One of those things where there were signs and there weren't, depending on who you ask. "I'm sorry." "Yeah." A pause. He was the kind of person who made rooms louder just by walking into them. Not in an annoying way, in the way where you notice after that something's gone quiet. He knew exactly what she meant. He didn't say so right then. He just sat with it. Around them, the gala moved through its paces. Dessert came. The speeches began. A woman at a podium talked about cardiac care programs and partnership funding and lives saved and lives not saved. Grayson half listened. He'd gotten good at half listening to speeches. Under the table, his phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson. "Ellie fell asleep about 20 minutes ago. She's fine. Enjoy your evening." He exhaled something he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good news?" Vivian asked. He showed her the text without quite deciding to. "My daughter. She has this thing about me being out at night. She worries." Vivian read it. Something crossed her face. Quick, gone. "She sounds like a good kid. She's the best person I know. She's going to be absolutely unbearable when she's a teenager, and I fully deserve it for all the time I spent being hard to deal with as a kid." A real laugh from her. Small, but real. The kind that doesn't have time to be performed. What kind of hard to deal with? The quiet kind. Which is actually worse because people kept thinking I was okay. "Were you?" "Sometimes. Not always." He shrugged. "I got better at telling the difference. Between being okay and not being okay? Between the version you show people and the version that's actually happening." She looked at him for a second with an expression he still couldn't fully read. Something that sat between warmth and something heavier. Like someone who recognized the distinction he was making in a way that came from somewhere specific. "That's a useful skill," she said. "It's a survival skill," he said. "It's different." He left before 11. Shook hands with the Hendersons, who turned out to be perfectly pleasant people he would never see again. Found Marcus near the bar with Claire, who was warm and red-haired and already apologizing preemptively for the setup that wasn't a setup. "How was it?" Marcus asked, with carefully engineered casualness. "The food was good," Grayson said. "And?" "And what?" "Gray." He looked at his friend, who was watching him with the expression of a man who had known him for 11 years and could read him at a 50-foot distance on a bad night. He thought about the 2 hours he'd just spent in honest conversation with a woman he'd never met. He thought about the way she'd said someone's gone quiet, like she meant it exactly, and had never said it to anyone before. "And it was fine," he said. Marcus waited, and I told her I'd meet for coffee sometime. Marcus's face did something complicated and controlled. "Okay," he said very calmly. "Don't," Grayson said. "I'm not doing anything." "You're doing a face." "I don't have a face." Claire put her hand over her mouth and looked away. He said goodnight. Walked back to his car in the cool November air, 3 blocks through the kind of city quiet that only happened after 10, the streetlights amber on the empty sidewalk. He thought about Ellie asleep on the couch at his apartment, small and warm and carrying things she shouldn't have to carry yet. He thought about a woman in a dark green dress who laughed like she hadn't expected to. He pulled out his phone and looked at the business card she'd pressed into his hand when they'd said goodbye. Not in the way people exchange cards at events, not with the professional reflex of it. She'd held it for a second before giving it to him and said, "No pressure. But if you want to finish that conversation," he hadn't known they'd left one unfinished. Looking back, he thought maybe they'd both understood, without saying it, that what they'd actually spent the evening doing was just barely beginning to start. He was quiet on the drive home, the kind of quiet that has something in it, not the empty kind. 2 years was a long time. 2 years was also no time at all. He knew both of those things simultaneously in the way that grief teaches you to hold contradictions, the before and the after existing in the same space, the way you could love someone who was gone and also be standing at the beginning of something that had nothing to do with them. Lauren. Her name was Lauren. He still said it to himself sometimes, not to hurt himself, just to make sure it still sounded right, like the right word for the right thing. She'd been 29 when she died. Heart failure, sudden onset, rare presentation, the kind of thing the doctors said in careful language that added up to, we don't fully understand why, and nothing would have changed the outcome, and all the other true things that still felt, in the dark of that first year, completely inadequate. He had become a different person in the time since. He knew that. He'd become quieter in some ways, louder in others, more honest with strangers sometimes than he was with people he'd known for years. He'd learned to be present the way you only learn when absence has been close enough to smell. He parked outside his building, sat in the car for a minute. He took the business card out of his pocket and looked at it. Simple, cream-colored stock. Vivian Ashcroft, Ashcroft Ventures. A phone number, no title, which told him something. People who needed titles on their cards were usually people still figuring out what they were. People who didn't need them usually knew. He put it in his wallet. He went upstairs and let Mrs. Patterson go home, and stood in the doorway of the living room where Ellie was curled on the couch with a blanket, her fox pajamas, her messy braid coming apart. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned the lamp on low. He moved through the quiet apartment, washed his face, hung the jacket on the back of the chair, untied the tie, still wrong from where Ellie had fixed it, and folded it more carefully than it needed to be folded. Put it in the drawer. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. He thought about honesty, about the particular kind of honest that happened late at night at a table full of strangers when you'd stopped caring about impressions. He thought about someone saying better means you can get through most days without it being the whole day, like they'd found the exact words for the exact thing. He didn't know yet what she was carrying. He didn't know yet that she already knew his name. He didn't know that across the city, in an apartment that occupied the whole top floor of a building he'd never been to, Vivian Ashcroft was sitting at a desk with a glass of water she hadn't drunk, staring at a folder she'd opened 4 times in the past 6 weeks and never been able to close all the way. She'd looked him up the morning after Elena mentioned his name, not to be invasive, because she had to know. Because her foundation's emergency cardiac program had been running at Mercy General for 2 years. Because when Elena had said Grayson Hale lost his wife suddenly, something had moved in Vivian's chest that was not instinct, but was not nothing either. She'd read the case summary. Not the details. She hadn't needed the details. She'd needed to know if it was what she already suspected. It was. She'd sat with the knowledge for 6 weeks. She'd almost called Elena to cancel the gala 3 separate times. She'd talked herself into going by telling herself it was possible he wouldn't be there, or that if he was there, they wouldn't be seated together, or that if they were seated together, it wouldn't matter. She was one name on a long list of foundation donors, one name attached to a program that had tried and failed to save his wife. And there was no reason that connection would ever need to surface. There was no reason to upend something that hadn't even started with a confession that might end it before it began. She told herself all of this. And then she'd sat across from him for 2 hours and listened to him talk about his daughter and his grief, and the lamp he left on low so a little girl wouldn't see darkness under the door. And she had understood that she was not going to be able to live quietly with what she knew. She just didn't know how to say it yet. She opened the folder again, closed it again. Outside her window, the city ran on its nighttime machinery, lights, traffic, the far-off sound of something she couldn't identify. Grayson Hale was somewhere in this city. He had smiled at her tonight like she was the first good thing that had happened to him in a while. And she had smiled back, and underneath all of it she had known something he didn't know, and that fact sat in her chest like a stone she hadn't figured out how to put down. She picked up her phone, looked at the contact she'd saved 2 hours ago after he'd texted her his number so she'd have it. She put the phone down. She thought, I'll tell him. When there's a right time, I'll tell him. She thought, there's no right time. She sat there for a long time in the quiet. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, Grayson Hale sent a message. "Coffee?" he wrote. And then, because he was who he was, "No pressure. I meant what I said, but I'd like to finish the conversation." On the other side of the city, Vivian read it twice. She looked at the folder on her desk for a long moment. "Yes," she wrote back. "When are you free?" She told herself she would find a way to tell him. She had no idea yet how much it would cost her when she finally did. The coffee shop Grayson picked was not the kind of place Vivian Ashcroft usually went. It was small and slightly crowded, and the chairs didn't match. The espresso machine behind the counter made a sound like a minor industrial accident every time someone ordered a latte. There was a bulletin board near the door covered in flyers for guitar lessons and lost cats and a community yoga class that had probably been canceled 6 months ago. The whole place smelled like dark roast and someone's breakfast sandwich. He was already there when she arrived, at a corner table with 2 coffees he'd ordered in advance, black for him and a latte with oat milk that she had mentioned in passing in a text 2 days ago. She noticed that. She wasn't sure yet what to do with it. "You found it," he said. "I had to drive around the block twice. There's no signage." "There's a sign. There's a piece of cardboard with the word brewed written on it in marker. That's the sign." He pushed the latte toward her. "Sit down." She sat. The chair wobbled slightly. She did not comment on this. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at him across the small table, and thought, not for the first time in the past 3 days, that he had the particular quality of someone who didn't perform being relaxed. He just was. Or he was good enough at it that the difference didn't matter. "Okay," she said. "Which part of the conversation are we finishing?" He thought about it. "The part where you said you know something about the difference between surviving and being okay." She looked at him. "I said that?" "Almost exactly." She remembered. She'd hoped in the days since that he hadn't held on to it. "That was a vague thing to say." "It was," he agreed. "That's why I want to know what you meant." Outside, a bus passed. The espresso machine detonated again. Someone at the counter was arguing cheerfully about whether oat milk changed the flavor profile or just the texture. Vivian looked at her coffee and thought about the folder on her desk that she hadn't moved, and the weight of it, and the man sitting across from her who had no idea it existed. "My brother died," she said. "I told you that. What I didn't tell you is that I blamed myself for about a year afterward." He was quiet, waiting. He'd mentioned symptoms. Not clearly. He wasn't a clear communicator about anything that scared him, but he'd said things over the phone, and I was busy. I was always busy. She turned the cup in her hands. "I kept telling myself I'd fly out and see him the following month. There was always a following month." She stopped. "There wasn't." "Vivian, I'm not saying it to get sympathy. I'm saying it because you asked what I meant." She looked up. "Surviving was the year after, when I kept working and kept moving and told everyone I was fine. Being okay started when I stopped pretending the guilt wasn't there and started actually looking at it." "And you're okay now?" "I'm better," she said, the same word he'd used. She watched him recognize it. "Most days it's not the whole day." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically. Grayson Hale, she was learning, didn't do dramatic. It was a small movement, a softening around the jaw, the look of someone who has been handed a language they already know. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's about right." They sat with that for a minute. The coffee shop did its thing around them. Noise and warmth and the anonymous comfort of strangers going about their Tuesday mornings. A kid at the table nearby kept dropping a toy truck and picking it up and dropping it again with evident satisfaction. The mother looked exhausted in the way Grayson recognized from the inside. "How old?" he asked, nodding toward them. She looked over. 2, maybe? 2.5? "The dropping phase," he said. "Ellie did that for about 4 months. Everything got dropped. Repeatedly. On purpose." "Why do they do that?" "Testing gravity, I think. Or testing you." He smiled a little, the small, dry kind. "The answer is the same either way. The thing falls. You pick it up. You hand it back. You do it again." She looked at him. "That sounds exhausting." "It is. And then one day they stop and you kind of miss it. He paused. Don't tell other parents I said that. They'll revoke my membership. She laughed. It came out before she could shape it into something more composed, and she didn't try to take it back. There's a membership? Very exclusive. The requirements are mostly you're tired all the time and you pretend you're not. Sounds like running a company. Except the company occasionally climbs into your bed at 3 in the morning because she had a bad dream and needs to tell you about it in full detail before she can go back to sleep. What kind of bad dreams? He considered. Last week it was that someone took all the crayons at school and there weren't enough colors left. Before that it was that she forgot her backpack on the bus. Kid-sized nightmares. He said it without sentimentality, just factually, but underneath the fact was something she could hear. I'm glad they're still kid-sized. She understood what he meant. She understood that he was aware they wouldn't always be. Tell me about her, Vivian said. Not the summary version, the real version. He looked across the table at her, and something in his expression said most people don't ask that, and then he started talking. He talked about Ellie the way parents talk about their children when they're not trying to impress anyone, not with accomplishments or milestones, but with specific odd details that didn't add up to anything except a person. He told her that Ellie had recently developed strong opinions about breakfast and would not eat eggs on Tuesdays for a reason she had never explained, and would not explain when asked. He told her that Ellie was afraid of escalators, but not stairs, and not elevators, only escalators, specifically the ones where you could see through the steps. He told her that Ellie had befriended every maintenance worker in their building by name and routinely brought them drawings she made at school. He told her that Ellie slept with 2 stuffed animals, a rabbit named Carl and a dog with no name that she referred to only as the dog, and that she had once asked very seriously whether Carl had feelings and whether those feelings got hurt when she ignored him for the dog. What did you say? Vivian asked. I said I thought Carl was probably okay with it, because Carl seemed like the secure type. She smiled. That was a good answer. I've had 8 years to practice. He picked up his coffee. She's the reason I'm... He stopped, started again. She's the reason most things work. When nothing else does, I know I have to get up in the morning and make her breakfast and make sure she has clean clothes. That's not nothing. That structure, that non-negotiable necessity of being needed, it kept me going in the first year, when I don't think I'd have had the motivation otherwise. She watched him say it, the honesty of it, the unglamorous honesty, the kind that didn't ask for anything in response. She thought about her own first year. The company had been her structure. She'd buried herself in work the way other people buried themselves in sleep or running or worse things, and it had been effective in the same blunt way that his version had been effective, and it had also cost her things she was still counting up. I think we both found our way through the only way we knew how, she said. Yeah. He set the cup down. I'm not saying it was the right way. I probably should have talked to someone sooner. I probably should have... He made a gesture that meant a lot of things I didn't do. But you get to the other side and you look back and you think, okay, I'm here. I made it. Now what? Now what? She repeated. That's the part I'm still working on. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought, tell him. She thought about the folder. She thought about what it would do to this quiet, honest, unexpectedly real thing happening across a wobbly table in a coffee shop with mismatched chairs. To put that information into it right now. She thought about saying, there's something I should tell you about my foundation, about the night your wife died. She thought about watching his face change. She didn't say it. She told herself she would. Soon. When they knew each other better, when she could explain it properly, when there was enough between them to absorb the impact. She told herself this and knew, even at the time, that she was making a choice that had a cost she hadn't calculated yet. So, she said instead, are you working on it alone? Or, not entirely alone, he said. I have Marcus, who means well and is frequently wrong in interesting ways. I have Dana, Ellie's grandmother. I have Ellie herself, who keeps me honest. He paused. I wasn't really looking for anything else. But, he met her eyes. But here we are. Here they were, in a coffee shop that smelled like dark roast and someone else's breakfast, with a kid dropping a toy truck repeatedly nearby, in the middle of a Tuesday morning when both of them were supposed to be somewhere else. Here we are, she agreed. They stayed for another hour. Botte. The weeks that followed had a texture Grayson hadn't expected. Not smooth, he wouldn't have trusted smooth, but real. Incrementally, stubbornly real, the way things are when they're actually happening and not just going through the motions of happening. They got coffee again. Then it was dinner. Not a planned dinner, just a situation where coffee ran late and someone was hungry and neither of them wanted to stop the conversation to go home and eat alone. They went to a Thai place 2 blocks from the coffee shop that had plastic menus and fluorescent lights and food that was legitimately the best pad see ew Grayson had eaten in years. Vivian ate with her jacket still on because the restaurant was cold, and admitted when he noticed that she was always cold and had just stopped mentioning it to people because they found it irritating. "Who finds that irritating?" he said. "People I've dated in the past. That's a weird thing to find irritating." "I thought so too," she said. "But by the time you've heard it enough times, you start thinking maybe you're the problem." "You're not the problem." She looked up from her plate. "Being cold all the time is not a personality flaw," he said. "It's a thermostat preference." She looked at him for a second. "That might be the most uncomplicated thing anyone has said to me in about 2 years. I'm an uncomplicated person." "No," she said, "you're not. But you're honest, which people sometimes confuse for simple." He didn't have an immediate response to that. He ate some of his noodles and thought about whether she was right. He decided she probably was. That was the thing about Vivian. He was learning she was precise. Not cutting, not cold, just precise. She said things that were exactly the things she meant, without the extra material people usually packed around an observation to make it softer or more deniable. It should have been uncomfortable. In his experience, people that direct usually were. There was an aggression to it, or a performance, the bluntness deployed as a personality. With her, it was just the way she talked. Like honesty was a habit she'd developed out of necessity and then kept because it turned out to be easier than the alternative. He liked it more than he'd expected to. He was starting to like a lot of things more than he'd expected to. He introduced her to Ellie on a Saturday, 3 weeks in, and it was not planned, and it was not a big moment, and it went the way most things with an 8-year-old go, which was chaotically and with tangents. They'd planned to meet at the farmer's market near the park, just the two of them, easy, public. Then the woman who was supposed to watch Ellie canceled that morning, and he'd texted Vivian to see if rescheduling made sense, and she'd written back, "Bring her. I don't mind, if you're okay with it." And he'd stood there in his kitchen holding his phone and thinking about it for longer than he probably should have, and then said, yes. Ellie had been told only that there was someone Dad wanted her to meet. This information had been received with a specific 8-year-old scrutiny that he respected and also found mildly terrifying. "Is she nice?" Ellie asked, in the car. "I think so." "You think?" "I'm pretty sure. She's been nice to me." "Maybe she's only nice to you." "That is a possibility I have not ruled out," he admitted. Ellie considered this seriously. "I'll figure it out," she said, with the confidence of someone who had developed through absolutely no formal training a workable system for evaluating new people. Vivian was waiting for them near the flower stalls in jeans and a dark blue sweater holding a coffee, and she looked different, he thought. Less armored than she usually did. Or maybe not less armored, but the armor was different here, more visible, because she was nervous. He could see it in the way she was holding her coffee with both hands, and the slightly too deliberate way she wasn't looking at them as they walked up. "Hey," he said. "Hey." She looked at Ellie. "Hi, you must be Ellie." Ellie studied her, openly, without apology, the way only children are still allowed to do. "You're tall," she said. "I am," Vivian said. "I hit a growth spurt at 13, and it never really stopped." "I'm going to be tall," Ellie said with conviction. "My dad says I've grown 2 inches this year." 2 1/4, Grayson said. 2 1/4, Ellie corrected, not looking at him, still looking at Vivian. "Do you like flowers?" "I like them okay. I don't know a lot of names." Ellie brightened. This was clearly the correct answer. Not knowing something was an opportunity, not a deficit. "I know some. My grandma Dana taught me. Come on." She grabbed Vivian's hand with the complete social fearlessness of a child who had not yet learned to be cautious about this, and pulled her toward the flower stalls, and Grayson stood there for a second and watched the two of them go, Vivian allowing herself to be led with an expression he couldn't quite name, something between surprise and something softer than that. He followed. For the next 20 minutes, Ellie conducted what was essentially a botanical tour, informed entirely by what Dana had taught her and supplemented liberally by things she was making up. She correctly identified zinnias and dahlias and sunflowers. She called something a purple circle flower with complete authority. She asked Vivian which was her favorite and listened to the answer with the focus of a researcher collecting data. "What did she say?" Grayson asked, catching up. "She said she likes the ones that smell like something," Ellie reported. "I said those are the best ones." "They are," Vivian agreed. Ellie nodded, satisfied. She moved ahead to look at a display of fall squash that interested her for reasons Grayson didn't ask about. Vivian came to stand beside him. They watched Ellie interrogate a vendor about which squash was the biggest. Vivian started. "I know," he said. "She walked up to me and said I was tall." "She says what she sees. I've been unable to train her out of it." "Don't." She said it quickly, with more feeling than he'd expected. "Don't train her out of it." A pause. People spend so much of their lives learning to say less than they mean. She's going to have plenty of time for that. He looked at her sideways. She was still watching Ellie. "You did okay," he said. "I was nervous." "I know, you were holding your coffee very intensely." She turned her head and looked at him with narrowed eyes. "Was it that obvious?" "Only to me. I've been paying attention." She looked back at Ellie, who had now apparently decided to purchase the largest squash available and was negotiating with the vendor, who was playing along with complete seriousness. Something moved through Vivian's expression, warm and then complicated and then just present, like someone watching something good happen and not being able to fully accept it without also feeling the weight underneath. He noticed. He didn't say anything yet. They fell into a rhythm, the three of them, in the way that happens when people stop asking permission from themselves and just let things be what they are. Not every weekend. Some weeks were hectic on his end, projects with deadlines and Ellie's school schedule and the unglamorous logistics of being a single parent. Some weeks were hectic on hers, board meetings and investor calls and the particular strain of being responsible for a company and the people inside it. But enough weeks. Enough evenings. Enough Tuesday morning coffees at the place with no signage. He met Elena Park eventually, a small, energetic woman who worked as Vivian's chief of staff and felt immediate and complicated guilt about the setup that wasn't a setup, and who expressed this guilt by being extremely good company at the dinner where they all met. Vivian met Marcus formally, outside of the gala context, and the two of them had a conversation about the ethics of organized coincidences that Grayson didn't fully follow, but which ended with Marcus saying, "I stand by it," and Vivian saying, "I'm not saying you were wrong, I'm saying you were lucky," which Grayson thought was exactly right. Dana met Vivian on a Sunday afternoon at the park when she'd come to take Ellie for their weekly lunch and found that Grayson and Vivian were there. The meeting was brief, 5 minutes, maybe less, while Ellie recounted the farmer's market to Dana in minute detail, and Grayson watched Dana the whole time, watching the way she held herself and the way her eyes moved between him and Vivian, and what he saw in her face was not concern and not reservation. It was something more like relief, and underneath that something like grief, and underneath that something so private he looked away. Later, Dana had hugged him at the door and said quietly, in his ear, "She seems like someone worth knowing." He hadn't trusted himself to say much back. "Yeah," was all he got out. Dana had nodded once and taken Ellie's hand and gone, and he'd stood in the doorway for a moment thinking about the particular grace required to want something good for someone you loved, even when the good thing had nothing to do with the person you'd lost and loved and were still carrying. He thought about Lauren. He always thought about Lauren, but it was starting to feel in a way that had taken 2 years to begin to feel possible, like thinking about Lauren and moving forward weren't the same as choosing between them. The nights were different. During the day, in coffee shops and at dinner, and at the farmer's market with Ellie between them, everything felt navigable, comfortable even, in the way that surprised him because he hadn't expected comfort. He'd expected the whole thing to feel like an effort, like something he was doing despite himself. Instead, it felt natural, which was its own unsettling thing. But the nights, when he was alone and the apartment was quiet and Ellie was asleep and there was nothing to do except be in his own head, were different. He thought about the moment in their third week when he'd reached across the table in the Thai restaurant and put his hand over hers, not planned, not strategic, just the impulse of the moment. And she'd looked down at his hand and then up at him and not moved away. He thought about how much that had cost him to do, and how small it was, and how those two things coexisted. He thought about the fact that he was starting to care about what happened to her, not in the abstract way you care about anyone you spend time with, but in the specific, inconvenient way, the way that meant he noticed when she was tired, when she was carrying something she wasn't saying, when the smile she gave him didn't quite match what was happening in her eyes. Something was there, something she wasn't saying. He couldn't name it, he didn't push. He knew better than most people that there were things that needed to be arrived at in their own time, and that forcing the timeline just meant the thing arrived broken. But he noticed. He'd been noticing for weeks. The slight tightening around her mouth when he talked about the hospital, about the last night, about the details of losing Lauren. Not pity. He knew what pity looked like. Something different. Something that moved and then was suppressed, quick and careful, like someone who had learned to control their face and sometimes almost succeeded. He told himself it was grief. She'd lost her brother. Of course, certain things landed differently for her. He told himself that, and mostly believed it, and in the part of himself that was quieter than his thoughts, he knew the shape of a secret. He knew what it felt like in a room, the particular weight of something unspoken between two people, the slight pressure differential. He'd lived with enough of his own to recognize someone else's. He let it go. Or he tried to. He thought, when she's ready, she'll say. Across the city, Vivienne was sitting at her desk again, and the folder was open again, and she was looking at the same summary she'd looked at 30 times in the past 2 months, and she was thinking about his face at the farmer's market when he'd watched her with Ellie, and she was thinking about the way Donna had hugged him at the door, and she was thinking about all the things that were accumulating between them that she did not want to lose. She thought, I have to tell him. She thought, not yet, a little longer, when there's more to hold it. She closed the folder. She turned off the desk lamp. She was already learning, without knowing it yet, that there was no amount of more that would make the telling painless, that the longer she waited, the more she would have to lose, that secrets don't get lighter with time, they just get harder to put down. But she didn't know that yet. She just knew she wasn't ready. She told herself, soon. The records arrived on a Thursday. Grayson had submitted the request 6 weeks earlier. Not impulsively, not in a bad moment, but deliberately, the way he did most things. He'd spent 2 years avoiding the details of Lauren's death because he hadn't been ready for them. He'd known the broad strokes: cardiac arrest, sudden onset, atypical presentation, the emergency team at Mercy General who'd worked on her for 47 minutes. He'd known she was gone before he got there. He'd known enough to bury her and raise their daughter and keep moving. But something had shifted in him recently. He couldn't name exactly what or exactly when. Maybe it was the therapy he'd finally started in September. A practical woman named Dr. Reeves, who had a plant on her desk that was always slightly too dry, and who did not let him get away with the summarized version of things. Maybe it was Ellie, who was getting older in the way children got older when you weren't paying close enough attention, and who had started asking questions about her mother that deserved honest answers. Maybe it was simply time. He'd told Dr. Reeves he wanted to request the records. She'd said, "Why now?" He'd thought about it honestly and said, "Because I think I can look at them now without it undoing me." She'd said, "That might be true. What would you do with what you find?" He'd said, "Understand it. Just understand what happened." She'd nodded. Not approval exactly. More like acknowledgement. "Okay, then do that." The envelope sat on his kitchen table for 2 days before he opened it. Ellie was at Dana's for the weekend. He'd planned it that way, though he hadn't told Dana specifically why, just said he had some things to deal with and could she take Ellie Friday through Sunday. And Dana had said, of course, without asking questions, which was one of the many things he valued about her. He made coffee. He sat down at the table. He opened the envelope. The records were dense. Medical language that required slow reading, abbreviations he had to look up on his phone, timelines that reduced the worst night of his life to a sequence of clinical notations. He read slowly. He went back. He cross-referenced things. He was an engineer. He understood systems. He understood how to read technical documentation. He understood the logic of sequential cause and effect, even when the subject matter was not reinforced concrete, but the failure of a 30-year-old woman's heart. He read for 3 hours. He understood, by the end of it, that the medical team had done what could be done. More than could reasonably have been expected. The notation of the attending physician, the response times, the interventions attempted. Nothing in the record suggested negligence or delay, or a decision that should have gone differently. The foundation-funded cardiac program that had been operational at Mercy General for 22 months had provided equipment and trained personnel that the hospital had lacked before. The program had been there because someone had paid for it to be there. He almost missed it. It was at the back, in the administrative section he'd been reading with less focus, a program disclosure, a funding source notation, standard documentation, Emergency Cardiac Response Initiative, Mercy General Hospital, program funded in partnership with the Ashcroft Family Foundation. He read it twice. He set the page down. He picked it up again. Ashcroft. He sat very still for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn 2 houses down, that late October holdout mow before the season ended, the sound of it ordinary and distant and completely disconnected from what was happening in his chest. He thought, it's a common name. He thought, it's not a common name. He picked up his phone, went to the Ashcroft Ventures website, which he'd looked at before, early on, the way you look up information about someone you're starting to know. The foundation page was linked in the sidebar. The Ashcroft Family Foundation, established 4 years ago. Focus areas, cardiac health access, early intervention programs, hospital partnership grants in underserved regions. He found the grant history. Mercy General, the Emergency Cardiac Initiative, year 2 of a 3-year funding agreement. He put the phone down on the table. He looked at the ceiling. He breathed. He thought about the first night, the gala. Her face across the table when he'd told her Lauren died. The thing he'd seen in her expression that he'd read as recognition, as grief, as someone who understood loss from the inside. He thought about every conversation since, every time he'd mentioned the hospital, or the night, or the details he'd parceled out slowly as he trusted her more. He thought about the particular way her face moved when he talked about it, the tightening, the things she suppressed. The look he'd told himself was just her own grief surfacing. He thought she knew. He thought she knew the whole time. He sat at his kitchen table for a very long time and did not move. He called her the next morning. He'd spent the night not sleeping, not in the catastrophic way of the first year, but in the grinding, repetitive way of someone whose mind won't stop running the same sequence. He'd gone through all the charitable interpretations. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she'd never connected the name. The foundation funded multiple hospitals. Maybe he was wrong about what she knew and when she knew it. He went back through the timeline. She'd met him in November. She ran the foundation. Elena Park, her chief of staff, had organized the introduction, had known his name, had known his situation. Vivian had her own resources, her own access to information. She'd told him, in the first weeks, that she'd investigated the connection. He hadn't understood what she meant at the time, had assumed she meant she'd looked him up professionally. He understood now. She'd known. She'd sat across from him at that first dinner and listened to him talk about losing Lauren, and she had already known. He called her at 9 a.m. She answered on the second ring. Hey! The Ashcroft Family Foundation funded the emergency cardiac program at Mercy General Hospital. He said it flat, no build-up. The program that was operating the night Lauren died. Silence. Not the silence of someone caught off guard, not the silence of confusion. The silence of someone who had been waiting for this moment and had still not found a way to be ready for it. Grayson, did you know? He kept his voice level. It took significant effort. When we met, when I told you about Lauren that first night, did you already know? Another silence, shorter this time. Yes, she said. He closed his eyes. I need to see you, he said. Today. Yes, she said again. Okay. Yes. She was already at the coffee shop when he arrived. The place with the cardboard sign, the mismatched chairs, the industrial espresso machine. She was at the corner table where they'd sat the first time, both hands around a cup she wasn't drinking from. She looked like someone who had not slept and was not going to pretend otherwise. He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything right away. He looked at her. He waited. I found out your name before we met, she said. She wasn't going to make him extract it piece by piece. He registered that, even now. Elena told me about you, that she was thinking of introducing us. She mentioned your wife, how you'd lost her. I looked up your name. I don't know why exactly. I think I was trying to... She stopped, started again. I have access to the Foundation's program records. When I searched your wife's name, the Mercy General connection came up. I recognized the program immediately. I'm the one who approved that partnership. Okay, he said, just to say something, just to keep her moving. I should have said something. I know that. I knew it then. She looked at her hands. I almost didn't go to the gala. I thought, what is the point? This is too complicated before it even begins. But Elena said you needed the evening out, and She pressed her lips together. I went, and then I met you, and you were not what I'd expected. And by the end of the night, you'd already given me your number, and I'd already agreed to coffee, and I thought, okay, I'll tell him at coffee. I'll explain it when I can explain it properly. But you didn't. No. And then the next time. And the next. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. Not because she wasn't feeling it. He could see exactly how much she was feeling it, because she'd decided not to use that as leverage. Every time was wrong, she said. Every time I got close to it, I'd look at you and think about what it would do. I was afraid. She said the word like she wasn't used to saying it about herself. I was afraid that the moment I told you that would be all I was, the foundation, the program, the person associated with the worst night of your life. And I didn't... Her voice caught, just slightly. I didn't want to lose what was happening between us. So you kept it from me? Yes. He sat back in the chair. The espresso machine went off. Someone near the door was laughing about something. The whole ordinary machinery of the place kept running. Do you understand, he said slowly, what it's like to sit across from someone and trust them? To be deliberately, carefully, honest with them about things you don't tell most people? And find out they've been carrying something the whole time? Yes. She didn't try to qualify it. I do. It doesn't feel like protection, he said. It doesn't feel like you were trying to be kind. It feels like you decided I didn't get to know something about my own life. She flinched. Small, controlled. I know. Lauren died. His voice held. He was proud of it for holding. She died, and I spent 2 years not knowing why well enough, not reading the records, not being able to look at it directly. I finally looked at it. I was ready to finally look at it, and in the middle of looking at it, I found your name. He stopped. That's what you made happen. That's the version of finding out you gave me. Vivian looked at him and didn't say anything, and the look on her face was the look of someone who is absorbing a true thing and not defending against it. He would remember that later. In the moment, it didn't change anything, but he would remember it. I'm not saying the foundation caused her death, he said. I read the records. I understand what the program did. I'm not... He exhaled. I know the medical team did everything they could. I know that. What I'm talking about is the months of silence. That's what I'm talking about. I know, she said. That's the thing I did. Not the other. I know. But the silence is mine. Why didn't you just... He stopped, tried again. There were 100 moments. The restaurant, the farmer's market, any night when Ellie was asleep and it was just us. Any of those moments. Why not then? Because every one of those moments, she said quietly, was a moment I didn't want to break. He looked at her. That's not a justification, she said quickly. I'm not offering it as one. I'm just... You asked why. That's why. I was selfish about the moments we had. I kept thinking there'd be a better one coming, one where the telling would damage less, and there wasn't, because there never is. There's just the telling or the not telling, and I kept choosing not telling. She stopped. Her voice had gone rough around the edges. I know what I did. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was thinking of you. I wasn't. I was thinking of myself. The honesty of it landed on him in a complicated way. He'd come here ready for something, some version of the conversation that involved her defending herself or explaining it in a way that was designed to reduce its size. And this wasn't that. This was someone sitting in the full weight of a decision they'd made and not asking to be relieved of it. He didn't know yet what to do with that. I need to go, he said. She nodded. I don't know. He stopped. He was going to say, I don't know what this means, or I don't know where this goes, or some other sentence that was true, and also not yet the right shape. I need time to think, to figure out what I actually feel, separate from how angry I am right now. Okay, she said, I'm going to pick up Ellie tomorrow. He said it for no reason except that it was true, and he needed to say something concrete. I'm going to pick her up and take her to the park, and I'm going to do my day, and then I'll figure out the rest. Okay, she said again. He stood up. She looked up at him. He looked at her for a long moment, this woman he'd been allowing himself to want, who had been carrying his wife's name in a folder for the entire duration of whatever they'd been building, who had just sat here and told him the truth with no protective softening around it. I'm not gone, he said. He didn't know why he said it. This isn't me leaving. I just need to… Grayson, she said his name quietly. You don't have to manage how I feel right now. You're allowed to just go. He looked at her for one more second. He left. He walked 6 blocks before he stopped. He was in front of a hardware store he'd never been into, the kind with a hand-painted window display of rakes and bags of winter salt. He stood there on the sidewalk and breathed and let the cold air do its work. He was angry. He'd known he was angry on the drive over, had tried to do something useful with it, tried to convert it into the kind of controlled, specific anger that made conversations productive instead of destructive. He'd mostly managed it. Mostly. Underneath the anger was something else, and he didn't want to look at it yet. He'd look at it later, when the anger had done whatever it was going to do, and the other thing could surface without getting drowned out. He pulled out his phone. He almost called Marcus. Then he put the phone back in his pocket, because what he needed right now was not to talk. He needed to walk and be cold, and let the thing settle into its actual shape before he started telling it to someone else. He thought about Vivian's face, the way she'd looked at him when she told him why. I was selfish about the moments we had, and the particular quality of saying that. He'd heard excuses his whole life. He knew what excuses sounded like. What she'd said wasn't an excuse. It was an explanation stripped of the parts that were supposed to make you feel better about it, and that made it worse in one way and something else in another way. He thought about Lauren. He thought about the records, the program notation, the team that had worked 47 minutes. He thought about the fact that the equipment those people used had been there because someone had funded it. He thought about what Mercy General's cardiac response capability would have looked like without that funding. He thought about it honestly, without flinching. The program hadn't saved his wife, but it had tried. And it had been there because of a decision Vivian had made before she ever knew his name, before there was anything between them, before any of this existed. He knew these two things were not the same, the Foundation's role and the secret she'd kept. They weren't the same thing, and he wasn't going to collapse them into one because it would have been easier to be clean about it. The Foundation had tried to save Lauren. Vivian had kept the connection from him for months. Both of those things were true, and they existed separately, and he needed to hold them that way. He started walking again. Dana called that evening. Not, he thought, because she knew, she couldn't have known, but in the way she sometimes did, the way that he'd stopped trying to explain away. Just checking in, she said. How are you? He was sitting on the couch, no lights on, apartment quiet. I'm having a hard day. Do you want to talk about it? Not yet. A pause. Ellie made a papier-mâché turtle today. It's very lumpy and she's very proud of it. He laughed once, involuntarily, the kind that surprised you. Of course she is. She named it Gregory. She would like you to know Gregory will be coming home with her tomorrow. Gregory's welcome. Are you sure you're okay? He thought about honest and not honest. I found something out today that I'm trying to figure out what to do with. About Vivian? She said the name carefully, not like it was fragile, but like she was paying attention. He paused. You knew something. I didn't know anything specific, Dana said. When I met her, there was something in her face when she looked at you, not guilt exactly, but awareness, like someone who knew more than they were saying. A pause. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I decided to wait. He closed his eyes. You trusted her, Dana said quietly. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact offered carefully. Yeah. And she let you down. Yeah. Dana was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to something private. Grayson, I'm going to tell you something that I've never told you because I didn't think you were ready to hear it. He opened his eyes. The week before Lauren died, Dana said, she called me. She said she'd been having chest pain for 2 days. I told her to go to the doctor. She said she would. She didn't. She waited 4 more days. A pause. I have never stopped thinking about whether I should have pushed harder, whether I should have driven over there and made her go, whether there's something I could have said that would have... She stopped. And the answer is probably not. Probably she would have found a way to wait anyway. But I still think about it every single day. Grayson didn't say anything. What I'm telling you, Dana said, is that the people who love someone who died, we all carry a piece we should have done differently, whether it's real or imagined, whether it changes anything or not. She paused. I'm not saying what Vivian did was the same. I'm saying people carry things that are too heavy to say out loud, and sometimes the carrying makes them do wrong things for complicated reasons. That doesn't make it okay, he said. No, Dana agreed. It doesn't. I'm not saying it should. I'm just saying, before you decide what it means, make sure you know what you're actually deciding. He sat in the dark for a long time after they hung up. He thought about Dana at the kitchen table with Lauren's medical records she'd never seen and never asked to see. He thought about a woman sitting at a coffee shop with her hands around a cold cup, saying I was selfish about the moments we had and not asking to be forgiven for it. He thought about Ellie's lumpy turtle named Gregory, making its way home tomorrow. He thought about how much room there was inside a person for terrible things and true things to coexist. He didn't have a resolution yet. He wasn't going to force one. But the anger, which had been the whole of it for most of the day, was starting to show him what was underneath. And what was underneath was grief and confusion and something that had not yet made up its mind about what it was going to become. He turned a lamp on. He sat with it. He went back to the records on Sunday. Not because he was looking for something new. He'd read them twice already. Once in the first shock of it, once more carefully the following morning before he'd called her. But something Dana had said stayed with him. Make sure you know what you're actually deciding. And he didn't think he knew yet. He thought he was deciding based on the thing he'd found and the way he'd found it. And those were 2 different things. And he needed to be honest enough with himself to separate them. He spread the documents across the kitchen table. Coffee on one side. Ellie's turtle Gregory presiding from the counter where she'd set it before Dana took her to school Monday morning. Gregory was lopsided and painted an aggressive shade of green that didn't occur in nature. Grayson found him mildly comforting. He read slowly this time. Not the administrative section. He'd read that enough. He read the clinical record from the beginning. The timeline. The response log. The intervention notes. Lauren had presented at 11:42 p.m. The emergency team had been on her within 4 minutes of arrival. The notation from the attending physician documented every decision point, the defibrillation attempts, the medication sequence, the point at which they'd escalated, the point at which escalation had nothing left to offer. 47 minutes. He'd known that number for 2 years without knowing what it contained, and now he knew. 47 minutes of people doing everything the protocol allowed, and then finding things beyond the protocol and trying those too. There was a note from a resident, Dr. Kwan, that wasn't required documentation, just a line added at the end of the shift report. Patient presented with no prior documented history of cardiac events. Program equipment and personnel performed above standard response parameters. It was a clinical sentence doing the work a clinical sentence could do, which was not enough, and was also something. He read it 3 times. He sat back. The Ashcroft Foundation's funding had put that equipment there, had put Dr. Kwan there, trained to a higher standard than the hospital had previously maintained, had put the defibrillator model that gave them options they wouldn't have had 2 years prior. None of it had saved Lauren. All of it had tried. He thought about Vivian the first night, when she'd told him about her brother. Heart problem. One of those things where there were signs and there weren't, depending on who you ask. He thought about a woman who'd lost her brother to a cardiac event and then spent the following years funding cardiac response programs at hospitals that didn't have adequate resources. He thought about that sequence. Grief turned into infrastructure, turned into a program at Mercy General, turned into the people who had stood over his wife for 47 minutes with better tools than they would have had otherwise. He thought about all of that and sat with the fact that it didn't resolve anything. It wasn't supposed to resolve anything. It was just true. It was part of the true picture, and he hadn't had the full picture until now, and he was trying to look at what he actually had. What he had was this. Vivian Ashcroft had not caused his wife's death. The connection between her and the worst night of his life was not malice and not negligence. It was the specific terrible coincidence of a woman trying to do something with her grief that put her, unknowingly, in proximity to his. And then she'd found out. And she'd been afraid. And she'd made a choice he didn't agree with and couldn't entirely fail to understand. He sat at the table for a long time. He thought about the word trust, about what it meant in practice, not in principle. In principle, trust meant telling the truth. In practice, trust meant something harder. It meant telling the truth when telling it could cost you the thing you were afraid to lose. Vivian had known that cost and had not paid it, and that was a real failure. He wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. But he also thought about his own silences, the things he hadn't said for months after Lauren died, because saying them would have made them more real. The way he'd told people he was fine, because fine was easier to carry than the truth, and he'd needed easy for a while. The way he'd let an entire year go by before he talked to a therapist, because he'd been afraid of what he'd find if he looked at it directly. He wasn't the same as her. His silences hadn't hurt anyone who trusted him, but he knew what it felt like to be too afraid to say a true thing. He didn't know yet if that was enough to build on. He gathered the records back into the envelope. He looked at Gregory for a moment. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Vivian. He called Marcus. Marcus came over that afternoon with a six-pack and the specific expression of a man who had been waiting to be needed and was relieved to finally be called. He sat across the kitchen table from Grayson and listened to the whole thing. The records, the foundation notation, the coffee shop conversation, Dana's call, without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Grayson noted it. When he finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Okay," Marcus said. "That's it? Okay." "I'm processing." He turned his beer bottle in his hands. "How much of what you're feeling right now is about Lauren, and how much is about Vivian?" Grayson looked at him. "Both. They're connected. They're related," Marcus said. "They're not the same thing." He paused. "The Lauren part, is that grief? Anger? Something you didn't know about her death that's changed how you think about it?" "No, it doesn't change. The medical facts don't change." He'd already gotten there, and it was still hard to say clearly. The program was there. It tried. It failed. Lauren died. That's still what happened. So the foundation didn't make it worse? No. Did knowing about the foundation change anything about how you understand what happened to Lauren? He thought about it. It filled in a gap. I know more about the context now, the equipment, the team, what they had. He stopped. It didn't open a wound, it closed one, a small one. Marcus nodded slowly. So the wound that's actually open right now is the Vivian one. Yeah. And the Vivian wound is about trust. It's about her sitting across from me for months, Grayson said, and his voice got harder just from saying it. While I told her things I don't tell people. He stopped. I was letting her in. You know how long it takes me to let anyone in? And she had this information the whole time, and she chose over and over not to tell me. I know. Marcus said it without any qualifier. That's real. That's not nothing. I know it's not nothing. I need to figure out if it's everything. Marcus looked at him steadily. What does Dr. Reeves say? I have an appointment Thursday. What do you think she'll say? He almost smiled. She'll ask me what I think, and then wait until I actually say what I think instead of what I think sounds reasonable. Smart woman. Marcus drank his beer. What do you actually think? Not the version that sounds measured and fair, the version that's happening. Grayson looked at the table, at the envelope of records, at Gregory on the counter, slightly more aggressively green in the afternoon light. I think, he said slowly, that I'm angrier than I've been about anything in 2 years. And that underneath the anger, He stopped. Sad. Because something was happening between us that I didn't expect it. I wasn't looking for it. And I'd started to... He couldn't finish the sentence. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. I know. And I don't know if I can get back to that. I don't know if I trust her enough now to... I don't know if trust is even something that can be rebuilt from here. Can I say something? That's why you're here. You know I'm biased, Marcus said. I'm the one who put you at that table. I feel responsible for how complicated this got. So take what I'm about to say with that context. Marcus, I've known you for 11 years, he said. I watched you with Lauren, and I watched you after Lauren, and I know what you look like when you're going through the motions, and I know what you look like when something is actually real. He put the bottle down. With Vivian, that was real. Whatever is happening there, it's not you being polite. It's not you trying to move on because you think you should. It's real. Grayson didn't say anything. I'm not saying that means you have to forgive her or figure it out or any specific thing, Marcus said. I'm saying don't make the decision from the anger alone, that's all. Make it from the whole thing. He already knew that. He'd been trying to do that, but hearing it from Marcus, who had known him long enough to call him on his own patterns, landed differently than just thinking it. Okay, Grayson said. Okay. They drank their beers. Outside, the light was going the way it went in late October, early and orange and slightly melancholy, the kind of afternoon that always made Grayson think of things ending. He watched it through the kitchen window and thought about a woman who had turned grief into funding and funding into a program and a program into the people who had been with his wife at the end, and how none of that was simple, and how none of it resolved the thing that actually needed resolving. I need to read the Foundation's full records, he said, not just what's in her file. I need to understand the timeline. When she started the program, whether she could have known my name before Elena told her. Why does that matter? Because if there's any version where she knew before the gala and chose to go anyway, specifically to... He stopped. I need to know if it was calculated. You don't think it was? No, but I need to know. Marcus nodded. That's fair. He requested the Foundation's public records that week. The grant documentation, the program launch timeline, the public filings. They were a matter of public record. It took 2 days to compile them. He read them on Wednesday evening while Ellie was doing homework at the other end of the table, and he read them carefully, and what he found was this. The Ashcroft Family Foundation had established the Emergency Cardiac Response Initiative 3 years ago, 8 months after Vivian's brother died. The Mercy General Partnership had been approved in its second year, 14 months before Lauren's death, 8 months before Grayson's name would have meant anything to anyone connected to the foundation. The program had not been created for him. It had not been created with any knowledge of him. It had been created by a 27-year-old woman who'd lost her brother and decided to do something with it, because doing something was the only way she knew how to carry it. The coincidence was real. It was just a coincidence. He sat with that for a long time, listening to Ellie work through her multiplication tables with the particular focused muttering she did when she was concentrating. Dad, Ellie said without looking up, what's 7 times 8? 56. I knew that. I know you did. She erased something and rewrote it. Are you okay? He looked at her. She still wasn't looking up. She was 8, and she noticed things the way 8-year-olds notice things when they'd had to. Not with the vocabulary for it, but with an accuracy that sometimes stopped him. I'm working through something, he said. She nodded, still looking at her paper. Is it about Vivian? He paused. Why do you ask that? Because you have the same face you had when you were mad about the broken furnace. Except different. She looked up now. The furnace face was just mad. This face is mad and also something else. He looked at his daughter, 8 years old. Fox pajamas not yet, still in her school clothes. Hair coming out of its braid the way it always did by afternoon. Carrying things she shouldn't have to carry, just like he'd always known she was. But carrying them with a matter-of-fact grace that he hadn't taught her and didn't fully understand. Yeah, he said. It's about Vivian. She looked at him for a moment with the focused data collection expression. Did she do something wrong? She didn't tell me something she should have told me. Ellie processed this. Is she sorry? I think so, yes. Is it a thing you can fix? He looked at his daughter and thought about what fix meant. Thought about whether that was even the right word. Whether you fix something like this, or whether you just decided if it was something you could live with, going forward, with eyes open. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Ellie looked at him for another second. Then she nodded once and went back to her homework. Okay, she said, with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who had learned earlier than she should have that some questions didn't have fast answers. He sat there and loved her so much it hurt. He called Vivian on Thursday, after Dr. Reeves. Dr. Reeves had done exactly what Marcus predicted, had waited until he said the actual thing instead of the reasonable-sounding version of it. The actual thing had taken about 40 minutes to arrive at, and it was this. He was not afraid of the connection to Lauren. What he was afraid of was building something on ground he now understood was uneven, where her fear had been more powerful than her honesty, and not knowing if that was a pattern or a moment. Dr. Reeves had said, "What would change your answer?" He'd said, "Knowing if she can be honest when it costs her." She'd said, "And how would you know that?" He'd said, "I'd have to give her the chance." He called from the parking lot outside Dr. Reeves's office. The late afternoon was cold and clear in that specific November way. Sharp light, bare trees, the air smelling like something almost winter. Vivian answered on the third ring. Hi. Hi. He looked at the steering wheel. I've been reading the Foundation's public records. A pause. Okay. The program launched before Lauren died. Before you knew my name. The connection was, it was coincidence. I know that now. She was quiet. That's not why I'm calling, he said. I'm calling because I want to meet. Not at the coffee shop. Somewhere. I don't know. Somewhere else. Okay, she said. Her voice was careful, giving nothing away, and he understood that. She had no way to know yet which direction this was going. He was probably not giving much away either. There's a park near my building, he said. Eastfield. There's a bench by the pond. Can you be there at 5? Yes. He got there first, sat on the bench and watched 2 ducks making circuits of the pond with the determined efficiency of animals that had somewhere to be. The park was quiet. A woman walking a dog in the distance, a jogger going past on the path. The sky was doing the orange to purple thing it did in November just before dark. He heard her before he saw her, her footsteps on the path, unhurried, the sound of someone not trying to control how they arrived. She sat down beside him on the bench. Not close, not far. Present. They both looked at the pond for a moment. I read the Foundation timeline, he said. Everything's public record. The program was already running. You couldn't have known who I was when you started it. No, she said. I didn't know you existed. I know. He put his hands on his knees. I needed to confirm it, that's all. That it wasn't calculated. That the Foundation wasn't connected to me in any intentional way. It wasn't. She said it without defensiveness, just straight. I know. He watched the ducks. I've been sitting with the records for 4 days. The clinical record, the program documentation, all of it. He paused. The team did everything right, Vivian. Every decision they made was the right call. The equipment your foundation funded gave them options they wouldn't have had otherwise. He stopped. Lauren still died. She was going to die that night no matter what. I believe that now. I've read enough to believe it. Vivian didn't say anything. He could feel her listening. The Foundation's role in that night, he said slowly, is not something I'm angry about. I want to be clear about that. If anything, he stopped. It was hard to say. If anything, knowing it was there, knowing the program was there, knowing someone did everything the current science had to offer, it helps. Somehow. I don't fully understand why, but it does. Okay, she said quietly. The thing I'm still working through is the months you didn't tell me. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the pond, her hands in her jacket pockets, her expression steady in the effortful way of someone working to keep it that way. That's the actual thing, not the foundation, not Lauren, the choice you made every time you chose not to say it. She turned and looked at him. I know. I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it straight. Okay? If it hadn't come out in the records, he said. If I'd never made that request, were you ever going to tell me? She held his gaze. The question sat between them in the cold air. Yes, she said. I think yes, but I don't know when, and I don't know that I'd have done it in time, before the weight of it became what it became. She stopped. I want to tell you that I had a plan or a timeline. I don't. I was afraid, and I kept waiting for the fear to get smaller, and it didn't. It got bigger. Because there was more to lose. Yes. He looked at the pond. A third duck had joined the circuit. Here's what I know, he said. I know you didn't cause what happened to Lauren. I know the connection between you and that night was coincidence that became complicated when you found out my name. And I know you made a choice I disagree with about how to handle that complication. He paused. And I know that in the months we've been spending time together, nothing else you've said to me has felt like a performance. Everything else has felt real, true. I've been paying attention, and I believe that. Vivian was very still beside him. So I'm left with a question, he said, which is, was the silence the exception or the pattern? Was it one wrong thing done out of fear in an impossible situation, or is it how you operate when things get hard? The question landed. He watched it land. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured in the way of someone choosing words that were true and not just useful. I think it was fear in an impossible situation, she said. I don't think it's who I am. I think I've been direct with you about everything else. The hard things, the things about my brother, about the company, about what I actually feel instead of what's easier to project. I've been honest with you in ways I'm not honest with most people. She stopped. But I failed that in this one thing, and it was the thing that mattered most, and I don't know how to make that smaller than it is. I'm not asking you to make it smaller. I know. I'm not going to tell you it was one mistake and it won't happen again. I can tell you that I understand what it cost, that I understand what trust means to you and what I did with yours. She paused. And I can tell you that whatever comes from here, if anything does, I won't carry secrets. Not with you. Not again. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, she said. I'm not asking you for anything. I just want you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm not looking for a way out of that understanding. The sky had gone full purple now, the last orange pressed down to the horizon. The park lights clicked on, warm and insufficient. Somewhere behind them, the dog walker had come back around on the path. Grayson sat on the bench beside Vivian Ashcroft and thought about what it meant to let someone back in after they'd shown you the place where their courage failed them. He thought about whether that kind of knowledge made a thing weaker or, if you looked at it a certain way, if you were honest about the way people actually were, instead of how you wished they were, stronger. He thought about Lauren. He let himself think about her clearly, without flinching, her face, her laugh, the way she always burned the toast and never mentioned it, the last ordinary morning he could remember before the night that changed everything. He thought about what she had meant and what she still meant, and how loving her did not require him to stop here, at this bench, in this November dark. He thought about Ellie's question. Is it a thing you can fix? He still didn't know if fix was the right word, but he thought, cautiously, honestly, without letting hope run ahead of what he actually knew, that it might be a thing he was willing to try to understand. Not today, not with any guarantee, but with the kind of deliberate, eyes-open willingness that was the only real version of a second chance he had left in him. He didn't say any of this yet. What he said was, I want to get there. I don't know how long it takes, but I want to try to get there." She looked at him. "I can't promise it'll be the same," he said. "I don't know if it'll be better or just different, but I'd rather find out than not." She nodded, small, careful, not letting herself have too much of it yet. "Okay," she said. "That's enough." It wasn't everything. He knew that and she knew that, and neither of them tried to pretend otherwise. But it was something, real, imperfect, fragile at the edges, exactly the way true things tended to be. The ducks finished their last circuit and disappeared under the dark water somewhere near the far bank. The park settled into its evening quiet. They sat there for a while longer, not saying much, just present in the particular way of two people who had decided that present was going to have to be enough for now. It was. The thing about rebuilding trust is that it doesn't announce itself. There's no moment where you look up and realize it's been restored. No clean line between broken and whole. It happens the way most important things happen. Incrementally, almost invisibly, in the accumulation of ordinary moments that don't feel significant until you look back and see what they added up to. The first month after the bench at Eastfield Park was careful. Not cold. Careful. There's a difference. Cold is distance pretending to be neutral. Careful is two people paying attention to the weight of things, making sure they don't move faster than what they've actually earned. They went back to coffee. Not the same coffee shop, not at first. That place had become too attached to specific versions of themselves. And they both understood without discussing it that they needed something less loaded. They found a diner on the east side that Grayson had been going to since he was 25. A place with vinyl booths and a laminated menu that hadn't changed in a decade, and coffee that was served in the kind of thick ceramic mugs that weighed half a pound. It was aggressively ordinary, and that was exactly what they needed. They talked differently now. Not better, necessarily, not worse. Differently. There was a quality to it that hadn't been there before, something more exposed and therefore more deliberate. Like two people who'd seen the underside of something and decided to look at the top again with clearer eyes. She told him things she hadn't told him before. Not the polished origin story of Ashcroft Ventures. Not the curated biography. She told him about the year after her brother died when she'd been so focused on the foundation launch that she hadn't cried once. Not because she was strong, but because she'd been running too fast to stop. And when she finally stopped, briefly, for a weekend in January with nothing to do, she'd cried in her car in a parking garage for 40 minutes and hadn't told anyone. She told him that she had 3 people in her life she fully trusted, and 2 of them were employees, and she'd been aware for years that this was not a healthy ratio. She told him that she'd been in therapy twice, stopped both times when things got close to something she didn't want to look at, and had not gone back, and that she probably should. "Probably," he said, not making it more than that. "I know," she said. "I know." He told her things too. Not new facts, she knew the facts. He told her the texture of it, the specific quality of the first 6 months after Lauren died, what a Tuesday felt like versus a Sunday, the way weekends were harder than weekdays because weekdays had structure and weekends just had time. He told her that he'd kept Lauren's handwriting on a grocery list taped inside a kitchen cabinet for a year and a half, that he'd look at it sometimes when Ellie was at school, not in a way that hurt exactly, but in a way that kept the thing real and specific and his. He told her he'd taken it down eventually, not because he was done with it, but because he'd noticed Ellie was reading it sometimes, quietly, when she thought he wasn't looking. And something about that felt like he needed to let it evolve into a different kind of keeping. Vivian listened the way she always listened, all the way, without preparing her next sentence while he was still talking. "Where did you put it?" she asked. "In her box," he said. "Lauren's box. The one Ellie knows about. Has her picture in it, some things from when she was little. The list is in there now." He paused. "Ellie goes through it sometimes. She's allowed to." Vivian looked at her coffee mug. "That's good parenting." "It's trying," he said. "Same thing, different name." She smiled, small, real. He caught it and held it for a second before it moved on. Besit. Ellie noticed the shift. She didn't say so directly. She was 9 now, or almost 9, and her methods of communication had grown more sophisticated. But Grayson could tell. She watched Vivian more carefully in the weeks after, with the particular assessment of a child who understood, without having the words for it, that something had gotten complicated and was in the process of getting less complicated, And who was reserving judgment on whether that was going to be okay? The verdict came on a Saturday afternoon in December when Vivian had come over to help Ellie with a project for school, a family tree, which had created a logistical challenge Grayson had been quietly dreading. Ellie had been insisting the project needed to include everyone, and everyone was a more complex concept in their particular family than the worksheet accounted for. Vivian had sat at the kitchen table with Ellie for 2 hours. Grayson had stayed out of it mostly, doing things in the other room that he could have done later, staying close enough to hear. He heard Vivian say, "You can draw it however makes sense to you. There's no wrong version of your own family." He heard Ellie say, "My teacher said there are branches." He heard Vivian say, "Yeah, but you're the one who decides what grows on them." He heard Ellie think about this for a moment, then, "Can I put my mom on it even though she died?" "Of course you can. She's still your mom. That doesn't stop." A pause. "Do you miss your brother?" "Every day." "Does it get less?" A longer pause. Grayson stood in the doorway of the other room, not moving, not announcing himself. "It changes," Vivian said. "It doesn't go away, but it changes into something you can carry instead of something that's carrying you." He heard Ellie process this. He heard the scratch of a pencil. "Okay," Ellie said. "I'm going to put her on the biggest branch." "That sounds right to me." He went back into the other room and sat down and did not do anything useful for several minutes. When Ellie was in bed that night and Vivian was putting on her jacket to leave, he said, "Thank you for what you said to her. She asked good questions." She was buttoning her jacket, not looking at him. "She always does." He paused. "She trusts you, not blindly. She doesn't do anything blindly, but she does." Vivian looked up. "I thought you should know," he said, "because I know it matters to you." She held his gaze for a moment with an expression that wasn't quite steady. "It does," she said. "It really does." He stepped forward and hugged her, not a careful hug, the real kind, the kind where you don't manage how much of yourself you're putting into it. He felt her exhale against his shoulder, slow and deep, like someone releasing something they'd been holding for a long time. They stood there like that in the entryway for a while. Gregory the turtle watched from the counter, impassive. Well, January came. Then February. The careful quality began to relax, not because they'd stopped paying attention, but because they'd paid enough attention that it had become something else. Not vigilance, but fluency, the difference between driving a new road slowly and driving a familiar road at normal speed. Vivian started appearing in the smaller textures of their life. Not in any announced way, just the way people do when they've been present long enough that their absence would be noticed. She knew which Tuesday was Ellie's library day and which was PE. She knew that Grayson's most productive work hours were early morning and that he'd be useless for anything that required full attention after 9 p.m. She kept a spare mug at his apartment, not formally, it just migrated there one afternoon, and neither of them moved it back. He started knowing her rhythms too, that she was sharpest in the late morning and irritable before her second coffee. That she had a specific silence she did when she was thinking through something difficult, not the closed silence of someone shutting down, but an open, focused quiet that meant something was being worked on and would surface when it was ready. That she laughed differently when she was tired, less controlled, more real, a little undone in a way he'd come to look for. He knew her the way you know someone when you've chosen to pay attention over a sustained period of time. Not perfectly. There were still things he didn't know, and things she was still working out how to say, and things about him she was still navigating. That was fine. He'd stopped needing it to be otherwise. In March, they had their first real fight. Not about the past, about something entirely ordinary, which meant they'd progressed to the level of relationship where ordinary things could carry the weight of what two people frustrate each other with when they're actually in it. It was about a decision she'd made regarding a foundation event. She'd committed to hosting a gala the same weekend Grayson had blocked off for a camping trip with Ellie and Marcus and Claire, a trip Ellie had been planning in her meticulous, hand-drawn way since January. Vivian had forgotten. He was more upset than the thing strictly warranted, and he knew that even while he was being upset, which didn't stop him from being upset. "I forgot," she said. "I genuinely forgot. It's not... I didn't prioritize the gala over Ellie. I just didn't have it in my head when I booked the date. You have a calendar. I know I have a calendar. It was on the calendar. I know it was on the calendar. I missed it. It was a mistake. She said it without apology padding, just straight. I'm sorry. What do you need? He stopped. What do I need? Yes, you're angry. What would make this better? He looked at her. He was still a little irritated, which he decided to be honest about. I don't need anything right now. I'm still annoyed and I'm trying to figure out if it's proportionate. Is it? He thought about it honestly. Probably not entirely. Then I'm going to sit here and let you be proportionately annoyed, and we'll figure out the rest. He stared at her. He started to laugh, not because it was funny exactly, but because she'd managed to make the situation slightly absurd in a way that diffused it without dismissing it. That's an infuriating thing to say, he said. I know. She didn't look sorry. The camping trip got rearranged by 2 weeks. Marcus was remarkably flexible. Claire was grateful for the extra preparation time. Ellie revised her hand-drawn plan with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who understood that adults sometimes required adjustment. The gala happened. Vivienne survived it and came home with a slight headache and an expression that said she'd remembered midway through the evening why she'd gone 8 months without attending one. They had dinner that night. Late, at the kitchen table with food from the Thai place that had become their default for evenings when cooking felt like too much to ask of themselves. They were both tired and a little silly from the tiredness, the way couples get when they've been going separately all day and are glad to be back in the same room, even when the room is quiet. Was it terrible? He asked. It was fine. Parts of it were actually good. She poked at her noodles. There was a donor there, an older woman, who's been giving to cardiac research programs for 30 years. She lost her husband at 42. She told me she's given about $6 million since then. Vivienne looked at the table. She said she found out that the money was being used to train ER nurses at rural hospitals, and she thought about all the nurses out there who were better prepared because of it, and she said that was the closest she'd found to making something good out of the worst thing. He looked at her. I thought about you, she said. About Lauren. About the program at Mercy General. She looked up. I thought about how I started the foundation because of my brother, and it wound up connected to your wife, and then it wound up connected to you, and none of that was planned and none of it was clean, but... She stopped. I don't know. The older woman said closest she'd found, and I thought, yeah, that's the most honest thing anyone said about this. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held it. Yeah, he said. That's about right. The proposal was not planned. He'd thought about it. In the abstract way he thought about things that felt real but distant, the way you think about buying a house or changing jobs, acknowledging the possibility without making it a project. He hadn't timed it or rehearsed it. He hadn't consulted Marcus, which was probably an oversight given Marcus's investment in the whole situation. But what Marcus didn't know in advance wouldn't give him the opportunity to be theatrical about. It was a Saturday in early November, a year, almost exactly, from the gala where they'd first met. He didn't plan that either. The calendar just worked out that way, and he noticed it after the fact. They were at the harbor. It was Vivienne's idea. She'd said she wanted to walk somewhere with water, something about needing to clear her head after a complicated week at work. The harbor was a 40-minute drive, and they'd brought coffee in travel mugs, and Ellie had fallen asleep in the back seat for about 20 minutes and woken up demanding to know if there would be seagulls. There were seagulls. Ellie had immediately established a complex diplomatic relationship with 3 of them, using most of a granola bar she'd had in her jacket pocket. Vivienne stood next to Grayson and watched this with the expression she'd developed over the past year, the one that was warm and easy in a way her public expressions never were, the one he thought of as just hers, the private version. She's going to get bitten, Vivienne said. Probably not. She has a gift. She has a granola bar. That's the gift. He watched Ellie negotiate with the largest seagull. She does this with everyone, finds what they need, and provides it. She learned that somewhere. He glanced sideways at her. Her mother was like that. Dana, too. He paused. She got the best of several people. Vivienne nodded. looking at Ellie, at the harbor, at the gray November sky, doing its complicated thing over the water. He had the ring in his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, which he recognized was a long time to carry a ring without doing anything with it. But every time he'd thought about when and how, none of the occasions had felt like the right shape. Not because they weren't good moments, there had been good moments, but because he hadn't felt ready, and he'd learned enough about himself to trust that distinction. He felt ready now. Not because the setting was perfect. It wasn't, particularly. Ellie was currently trying to explain something to a seagull, loudly. The harbor was cold and smelled like salt and low tide. A group of cyclists was navigating the path behind them. None of it was cinematic, but it was real. Completely, specifically, unmistakably real. This woman standing beside him with cold reddened cheeks and both hands around a travel mug, watching his daughter attempt cross-species communication. In a year that had held grief and breach and repair and the slow, unglamorous, entirely worthwhile work of choosing to stay in something when you had every reasonable excuse to leave. He reached into his pocket. She saw the movement, turned to look at him. He watched her read the situation, the expression shift from puzzled to comprehending to something he'd never seen on her face before, something unguarded in a way that was unusual even for her, even now. "Grayson, let me," he said. She closed her mouth. He looked at her. He'd thought about what he wanted to say. In the on and off way, he'd thought about the whole thing. And what he'd landed on was not a speech, but just the true version. "I wasn't looking for anyone," he said. "I want you to know that. When Marcus pushed me toward that table, I was ready to have a bad evening and go home. I wasn't looking, and I wasn't open, and I was fairly certain the part of my life that included this kind of thing was finished." He turned the ring in his fingers. "And then you sat down across from me and said I looked like I'd rather be somewhere else, which was accurate, and something about the accuracy of it was the thing that made me stay." She was very still. "This year has not been simple," he said. "It has been the least simple year I can remember, including some years that were genuinely terrible. We've earned every version of where we are. And where we are—" He paused. He looked at her face. He thought about the bench at Eastfield Park and the diner with the heavy mugs and the fight about the calendar and the dinner after the gala, when she told him about the woman who'd turned grief into something useful. He thought about all of it. "Where we are is somewhere I want to keep being." He held up the ring. "This is not a perfect situation," he said. "You're getting a 33-year-old structural engineer with a complicated past and a daughter who is currently arguing with a seagull. I am not the simplest offer anyone has ever made you." She made a sound, half laugh, half something else. "But I am honest," he said, "and I'm here, and I intend to keep being here, and I'd like to do that in the most official way I know how." He looked at her. "Vivian, will you marry me?" She looked at him for a moment with that expression, the unguarded one, the one he didn't have a word for yet. "Yes," she said, immediate. No pause. "Yes." He slid the ring on her finger. She looked down at it, then back up at him, and he thought she might be about to say something else, but instead she stepped forward, and he caught her. And they stood there on the harbor walk in the November cold with the seagulls and the cyclists and the gray water doing its thing around them. Behind them, Ellie's voice. "Dad, this seagull is being very unreasonable." A pause. "Wait, what's happening?" He turned around with Vivian still in the circle of his arm. Ellie was looking at them, at the ring on Vivian's hand, at the two of them. Her expression did several things in rapid sequence: surprise, calculation, something private, and then a look he recognized from the very early days after Lauren died. A look that had to do with the difference between what you'd lost and what you still had, and the complicated way those two things could coexist in the same moment. "Did you just—" she started. "Yeah," he said. Ellie looked at Vivian. "Does this mean you're staying?" Vivian crouched down, which she'd started doing months ago instead of staying at adult height, and looked at Ellie directly. "If you're okay with it," she said. "Yes, it means I'm staying." Ellie thought about this with her whole face. "You're not going to try to be my mom," she said, not accusing, clarifying. "No," Vivian said. "Your mom is your mom. That's not something I'm trying to replace. That's not something anyone could. Ellie considered this for a long moment. But you'd be here. Every day if you want. Another moment of serious assessment. Then Ellie looked at her father. Did you know this was going to happen today? I had an idea, he said. You should have told me. I would have worn better shoes. He started laughing, and Vivian laughed, and Ellie looked between them with the expression of someone who had made a joke and was pleased with the reception but was not going to show how pleased. Okay, Ellie said finally, with the tone of someone who has reviewed the available evidence and reached a conclusion. Okay, but I want to be in the wedding. You'll be the first thing we plan, Vivian said. Ellie nodded. She looked at the ring once more. Then she turned back toward the seagulls with the air of someone whose business here was concluded. Then, they got married in April, on a Saturday that threatened rain all morning, and then didn't follow through. Not a large wedding. That had been decided early and without much debate. Neither of them wanted a production. 40 people at a venue that was a converted boathouse on the river, with weathered wood and string lights, and flowers that were mostly local, early-season things. The kind that looked like they'd been arranged by someone who knew what they were doing but wasn't trying to prove it. Marcus was there. And Claire, who had married Marcus 6 months prior in a ceremony Grayson had stood up in and considered his partial repayment of a debt. Elena Park was there, in a dress she'd described to 3 different people as appropriate, with an expression that conveyed the dress was doing significant structural work. Dana was there, at the front, with Ellie, and when Grayson had looked over at her during the early part of the ceremony, he'd caught her crying in a specific way that he understood, and he'd had to look away for a moment. Dr. Reeves was not there, because that would have been strange, but Grayson had found a way to mention it during their session the week before, and she'd said good in the dry, warm way she said things, and then asked how he felt about it. And he'd said he felt ready and scared, and like he was doing the right thing. She'd said, all 3 of those sounds accurate. He'd said that was more validation than she usually gave. She'd said she thought he'd probably earned it. The ceremony was short. They'd written their own words, and both of them had an aversion to length for its own sake. Vivian went first. She said, I came to a table not looking for anything except a reason to leave early. What I found was someone who made me want to stay. I intend to keep earning that. She said it looking at him, not at her paper, because she'd practiced it enough that she didn't need the paper. He said, I spent 2 years thinking I understood what my life was going to look like. I was wrong about that in a way I'm grateful for. You showed me that the person you become on the other side of the worst thing isn't a lesser version. They're just someone who knows more about what matters. I'd rather go forward with someone who knows that too. He paused. I love you. That part I didn't need to practice. Ellie walked Vivian down the aisle. This had been Ellie's idea. She'd presented it to Grayson in December with the specificity she used when she'd already thought something through completely and was not presenting it for debate. I want to walk Vivian to you, because I'm the one who's going to be in this family with you both, and I think I should be the one who connects it. He'd looked at her for a long moment and thought, she's 9 years old and she has more clarity about important things than most adults I know. She'd worn a dress she'd chosen herself, green, because she liked green, slightly impractical for April, but she'd been firm about it. She'd held Vivian's hand the whole way. Not the flower girl walk, not the slow ceremonial pace of someone performing a role. Just Ellie walking next to Vivian the way she walked with people she was comfortable with, slightly too fast, shoulder touching shoulder. Grayson watched them come down the aisle together, his daughter and the woman who was about to become his wife, walking toward him in a converted boathouse on a Saturday in April, and felt something that didn't have a clean word but sat somewhere between gratitude and grief and forward motion. Not bittersweet. Not exactly. More like the feeling of holding 2 true things at the same time, and understanding, finally, that this was not a contradiction to be resolved. It was just life. The real version. When they reached him, Ellie put Vivian's hand in his with the small ceremony of someone who had thought about this gesture and meant it. Okay, Ellie said quietly. Take care of each other. Someone in the front row made a sound. He wasn't sure who. He didn't look. He looked at Vivian. She looked at him. They got married. Here is something that took Grayson Hale 33 years to understand, and another year after that to be able to say clearly, grief does not end and love does not replace. This is the thing no one tells you, or maybe they tell you, but you can't hear it until you're standing inside it. He had loved Lauren. He would love Lauren for the rest of his life, not as a ghost, not as a memory that faded and softened into something manageable, but as a real and specific person who had been here and was not here anymore, and whose presence was stitched into everything he was and everything Ellie was. There was no version of moving forward that required him to put that down. He'd been afraid for a long time that forward meant away. It didn't. Forward meant carrying it differently. And here's what Vivian Ashcroft taught him without meaning to, or maybe meaning to, but without saying it directly. That the things we carry sometimes find their way to each other through channels we didn't plan. She had carried her brother's death into a foundation, the foundation into a hospital program, the program into the night his wife died. And none of that had been intention or fate or anything that warranted a word bigger than coincidence. But it had happened. And then she had walked into a room and sat across from him and been honest about most things, and dishonest about one. And the one dishonesty had broken something, and they'd rebuilt it not back to what it was, but into something that knew more. Secrets don't protect people. He'd known this about his own, and then he'd learned it from hers. What secrets do is accumulate. They grow heavier the longer they're held, and when they finally surface, and they do, they always find a way to surface, the damage is measured not just by what the secret was, but by what it cost in the holding. He wasn't going to say she was wrong to be afraid. He'd been afraid too, in different ways, at different times. Fear was not a moral failing. What mattered was what you did when you recognized you were letting fear make your decisions. She'd eventually done the right thing, not by choice, not before the wrong thing had already done its damage, but she'd sat across from him at that coffee shop and told the truth without softening it, and she'd sat on the bench at Eastfield Park and answered his questions straight, and she'd done it all without asking him to make her feel better about it. That was not nothing. That, he had come to understand, was actually the thing that made everything else possible. And Ellie, his daughter, who had navigated the most complex territory a child could be asked to navigate, losing a mother, watching a father grieve, slowly accepting a new person into a space that used to belong to someone irreplaceable, and had done it with a kind of clear-eyed grace that Grayson knew he had not taught her. She'd arrived at her own understanding on her own timeline. She'd decided for herself when she was ready, and when she was ready, she was fully ready, and no amount of adult management had gotten her there faster than she was going to get there. He thought about the night she'd walked Vivian to him. Take care of each other. 9 years old, standing between the past and the future, and somehow speaking to both. He thought, whatever I got right as a father, the evidence is in that sentence. Isen. The first morning after the wedding, he woke up early, the way he always did. The house, they'd moved into a place that was bigger than his apartment but smaller than Vivian's, a compromise that had required considerable negotiation and felt right in the way compromises felt right when both people had actually given something, was quiet in the early morning way. Vivian was still asleep. Ellie was still asleep. Gregory the turtle sat on the kitchen windowsill because Ellie had insisted he needed a window in the new house, and no one had argued. Grayson stood in the kitchen and made coffee and looked out at the backyard, which was just a backyard, nothing special, a little ragged at the edges, the grass still finding itself after a winter. He thought about everything that had happened in the past year. He thought about Lauren in the way he always thought about her in the mornings. Not painfully, just present. The way the love of someone you've lost is always there if you don't run from it. He thought about the woman asleep in the other room who carried her own losses and her own failures, and who had, slowly and imperfectly and honestly, become part of the family he was still building. He thought, this is what enough looks like. Not perfect. Not complete in the way things are complete when nothing is missing. Complete in the way things are complete when you've learned to include what you've lost in what you still have. He heard footsteps, small, familiar, the particular cadence of Ellie on a morning when she'd woken up too early and was never going to admit she'd woken up too early. He poured a second mug. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her fox pajamas, which still existed, though they were getting tight, and would probably need to be retired before the year was out, which he was not going to think about right now. "You're up early," he said. "I woke up," she said, as if this was an answer. He handed her a mug of mostly warm milk with a small amount of coffee in it, which was the compromise they'd arrived at when she'd started requesting coffee approximately 2 years too early. She accepted it and came to stand beside him at the window. They looked at the ragged backyard together. "It needs work," Ellie said. "I know. We could plant things." "We could." She sipped her barely coffee. "Vivian would probably know what to plant. She knows flower names." "Some of them," he said. "You know more than she does." "That's true," Ellie agreed without false modesty. They stood there for a while in the morning quiet. The light was coming up slowly, the backyard going from gray to pale gold in stages. Gregory the turtle watched from the windowsill with his usual equanimity. "Dad," Ellie said. "Yeah. I'm glad we came here." A pause. "To this house, and—" She made a gesture that meant everything else, the whole year, the whole complicated arc of it. "To this." He looked at her. "Me too, Bug." She leaned against him briefly, the way she did sometimes. Not for long, never for long. She was a person with places to be. And then straightened up and looked back at the yard. "We should definitely plant something," she said. "Okay," he said. "We'll ask Vivian when she wakes up." "She sleeps late." "She does." "That's going to be a thing." "Probably," he agreed. She sipped her drink. He sipped his. The backyard continued becoming itself in the morning light, imperfect and specific and entirely theirs. That was how it was. Not finished, not perfect, not cleaned up into something that looked easy from a distance. Just real. The difficult, ordinary, irreplaceable kind of real that you only get to have if you stay in it long enough to stop being afraid of how much it costs. He stayed. They all stayed. That was enough. That was in fact everything.